Hello, Patreon. Here we are again. First off, I want to thank everyone watching this, new patrons, and those of you who've been here for a while. It's such a huge thing you're doing for the podcast here. The month of April was sort of a preview for me of what it would be like to try to do this while holding down a 9-to-5, and I honestly don't think it would be possible at all. So again, you're really helping me make this happen, and I really appreciate it. Last month, I told you about the types of distractions that came along with all the attention the podcast has been receiving. Agents, producers, journalists, etc. That's all good. We want these things to happen. As I said last month, it's usually a matter of having a conversation or two and then putting that on pause until I have time to come back to it after I get the next season done. There is one thing in particular, though, that has to happen pretty far in advance of the second season. I've been working on it for months, and I was hoping to get it finalized in April, and that didn't happen. Before I get into this, I want to specify that I'm not complaining right now. These Patreon updates are meant to give supporters a look behind the scenes of Cocaine and Rhinestones. What I'm about to discuss has been a huge part of what's going on behind the scenes over here. And I also know some of you have podcasts or are trying to start podcasts of your own, so if my talking about this can help anyone else out there in any way, then that's a good thing. I should point out that I did make good progress on Season 2 this month. I got books read and converted over to notes like I showed you last month. It's just that I didn't get as much of that done as I wanted. So, alright. As you know, Cocaine and Rhinestones is just me. You've already heard me say how much work goes into making the podcast and how I can't accept very much help with that. I don't need to repeat myself there. But there's a lot more that goes into having a successful podcast than just making the podcast. Some of the biggest things are sponsorships and PR. Let's start with sponsorships. Most podcasts operate on advertising revenue. This Patreon thing is off to a great start, but it's still just a start. If all I ever made from the podcast is what I'm making on Patreon now, I wouldn't be able to keep doing this. But that's fine, because I've already been contacted by some amazing potential sponsors for Cocaine and Rhinestones. These are people I'm excited to work with. It's not the same bullshit you hear on every other podcast. But there's a lot of work that goes into doing the bullshit ads you hear on every other podcast, so you know there's even more that goes into working with unique sponsors in unique ways. I could do it all myself, but it would add at least an extra month or two to the production process of every season, and all my hair would probably fall out. Next, PR. When you read about Cocaine and Rhinestones in The Guardian or The New Yorker, that doesn't happen just as a result of me making the podcast, putting it on the internet, the right people hearing it, and deciding to write about it. It would be beautiful if that were the case, but it's not. The reality is, before this, I was making a living as a freelancer in digital marketing and PR. One of the reasons the podcast exploded in popularity after the first season concluded is that was when I finally had time to put my PR skills to use. I can be busy making the podcast, or I can be busy conducting a PR campaign for the podcast, but I can't do both at the same time. And these things are equally important. I could make the best podcast in the world, and it wouldn't mean shit if nobody heard it. Tied to both of these things is just an ungodly amount of email on top of what I'm dealing with already. Just to give you an idea, right now, I'm getting well over 100 emails a week, and I'm not even trying to have people contact me about sponsorships or PR or any of this stuff. That's just from having an email address on the podcast website. And I'm answering all of these emails myself, which I'd like to keep doing, at least for the fan mail, and that'll be easier to do if someone else is taking care of the rest of it. So that's a lot of problems, right? What's the answer? Hire an assistant? That would be great, but like I said, Patreon isn't bringing in anywhere near that kind of money, and it's the only way the podcast is monetized right now. I think the answer is signing a deal with a podcast network. If you don't know what that is, the way I describe it is that it's a lot like being on a record label for a musician. Different podcast networks can help with different things, but what I mostly need is help with the things I just told you about. Signing with a podcast network is what I expected to do in April, and it did not happen. I'm not going to name any names, but I spent a long time, months, establishing a relationship with one entity, and then that conversation took a big turn I did not expect it to take, so I had to walk out the door. This is a setback, and it makes me feel like a lot of my time was wasted. Now I have to go back to all the networks who reached out to me while I was having that first conversation, and I gotta say, okay, let's talk. And in these conversations, I'm trying to find out what each network can do for me, waiting for them to get back to me with answers to the questions I have, making sure I understand what they're asking in return, just looking to see who's offering the best deal. All I want to be doing is thinking about and working on my second season. But instead, I had to go back to square one with all this network stuff. I would say forget it and just work on the podcast, but the right move for me to make is to get with a network, and that deal needs to happen way before the second season comes out because of how sponsorships and PR work. And it's not like I can just flip a coin because the choice I make here will affect at least the next year or two of my life and how I'm able to operate. So this really needs to get figured out at this stage of the game, and I'm going to get it figured out. I'm an action-oriented person. I fix problems. This, I see it as a problem. I'm going to fix it. Coming out of this month has put me in a frame of mind where I feel like I need to say no, or at least not now, to any further time commitments anyone asks me to make. I believe I mentioned in last month's video that I've started answering non-critical emails on only Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm also looking at implementing a personal policy of not leaving my house except for one day a week. I mean, if I already said I'd do something and it's on a different day, I'll go. If it's too important to say no to, I'll go. But let's say Wednesday. I pick Wednesday. That's the only day I'm going to leave my house. If someone wants to meet with me and they can't make it happen on a Wednesday, it must not matter that much, right? Right. So I'm seriously entertaining this idea. And if it sounds like an extreme measure to take or something, I don't know, maybe it is. But I want everyone to know it's not something I'm doing because I feel pressure from the audience to hurry up and deliver more content. I feel pressure from myself to be working more on the podcast, and I feel that pressure because it's what I know I should be doing. Fortunately, there's a lot of great stuff coming up in May. I've been talking with the Country Music Hall of Fame a lot more. Let's just say I'm really excited about their next exhibit, and I think you should be too. Everyone I've talked to at the Hall of Fame has been amazing. They're really excited about what I'm doing, and that's such a good feeling to know they're cheering for me rather than hoping I'll shut up and go away. Another cool thing I'd like to mention is Pandora, the internet radio platform, has invited me to be a curator. I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to talk about it right now, but I will soon be able to do something that many listeners have asked me to do, which is recommend good music that I think people should hear. My understanding is that it's going to be a lot more interesting than that, but again, I'm not sure what I can say about all of that at this time. It's something to look forward to. All right, if this update bummed anyone out, I'd like to let you know that I'm not bummed out or discouraged. Every road has speed bumps in it. I feel like I hit a pretty big one this month, but it's not going to keep me from getting where I'm going. Thousands of new listeners are coming to this podcast every single day. This thing is still spreading like wildfire. There's so much cool stuff right around the bend. I hope you have a good May. I know that I'm going to, and I'll see you again in June. Thank you. Thank you so much.